Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe we could take our seats and begin. I'm Roger Remington, and I work at the Vignelli Center. I just want to welcome all of you to their monthly Design Conversations lecture series. We're very pleased tonight to have our special guest here, and he's going to be introduced by my esteemed colleague, Ann Gory Goodman.
Thank you, Roger. I'm very excited to have Mark Jamra speaking to you today because I've known about his work and it just gets more interesting the more I hear about it. Mark was born in Toledo, Ohio, studied at Kent State Graphic Design, and then went for postgraduate work to the Weiterbildungsklasse für Grafik at the Kunstgewerbeschule in Basel, Switzerland, for 3 years, after which he went to Hamburg, Germany, where he was with the URW company doing something called Icarus, which predated all of the type design stuff that happened later. What was it called?
It was the first digital system that described letters by their contours. So
okay, let me get this right. He was working on a system where they could describe a letter form by its contour instead of by the little bitmaps that happened in early technology. And the reason I wanted to tell you about that is because when he went to school at Kent State, these things didn't exist yet. And for you guys here, there are things that you will be doing in 20 and 30 years that do not yet exist as well. So the idea that you can take the things that you're interested in and make them into new careers is very, very important. I'm going to let Mark now tell you a little bit about how he's used his interests in type design to then change millions of people's lives in the US and also on the African continent.
Thank you. Thanks, Ann. Could I have another microphone, please? I'm just, I feel like this is a news conference or something. I need this whole battery of microphones here. So, thanks everyone for coming out. I really appreciate this. This is my first time at RIT, and I have no excuses for why I haven't been here earlier. But inadvertently, I actually wore the colors today. I didn't have this planned at all. It just worked out that way. So I'm going to tell you about two projects, one past and one present, that will describe to you why and how I go about designing typefaces for languages that I can't speak and that have writing systems that I can't read. So there are three parts to the talk. For starts, I'm going to start off with a little bit of terminology just to make sure everyone's on board. I understand there's some people here who might not be studying graphic design or in that area. And so I just want to get some type terminology down so we're all on the same page. And then we'll go into the two projects after that. So, terminology. Script, for the purposes of this talk, the form of a writing system. Letters, glyphs, we often call them glyphs nowadays because a glyph refers to not only letters but actually any symbol or any sign that you can have in a typeface. Typeface is a type's visible design. This is often erroneously referred to as a font, but a font is actually the vehicle that carries the typeface. So nowadays in digital type, it's the digital file. That is actually the font. Of course, back in the day, it used to be the piece of lead. And on top of that piece of lead, you'd have a printing surface that was the face of the type. Get it? Okay? And font used to be spelled with a U, and was probably pronounced fount, and is derived from foundry. So it all kind of makes sense when you get right down to it. Let's see. Styles, variations of a typeface design. So for example, you have regular, or an italic, bold, bold italic, light. All those are styles. And when you have a group of those based on the same, on one typeface design all together, that is what we call the typeface family. So obvious, a well-known example would be Helvetica Regular, Helvetica Bold, Helvetica Bold Italic. They all belong to the same typeface family. A type system is a typeface family in which each style contains 2 or more scripts, and that's an important term as well, scripts, such as Latin. The Latin script is our alphabet, the one we used, as opposed to, say, the Cyrillic script, or Greek, or the Cherokee syllabary. And there I should probably define syllabary as well. A syllabary is not an alphabet. I can probably best explain it this way. A writing system that uses that's a syllabary, each glyph refers to a syllable. So whereas, say for example, the syllable ka, with our alphabet, we would need 2 or 3 letters to describe that, K-A or K-A-H or something. In a syllabary, that's described by 1 glyph. So as you can well imagine, writing systems that are a syllabary, they have a lot more glyphs than our alphabet because they have to cover every syllable within a given language. So for the sake of context, I should probably begin by stating that I'm not Cherokee, nor can I speak, read, or write the Cherokee language. I've designed type for many years, almost 35 now, mostly in the Latin script, but that would only partially prepare me for designing the Cherokee syllabary. And this was a project that would change the entire trajectory of my career as a type designer. So the story I'm going to tell you has 2 beginnings. One beginning is in 1997 when I began the sketches for a few typefaces. And one of them you see here was a mono-weight slab serif. And at the time, it really didn't take off for me. A couple of other designs spoke a little bit louder. They seemed to make a little more sense. And so I developed those, carried those to market. But this went into a drawer. And I only pulled it out every now and then to work on it, noodle around on it when I was taking a break from other projects. You may have experienced this yourself. So it disappeared into a drawer, but this is literally the first sketch of Foria's Cherokee. This is it right here. The other beginning is in the summer of 2011 at TypeCon in New Orleans. TypeCon is the premier conference for type and typography in North America. 3 guys from the Language Technology Office of the Cherokee Nation, and you see 2 of them here. That's Roy Boney on the left and Joseph Erb on the right. They gave a presentation about their work with the Cherokee syllabary. They had developed a soft keyboard for it and had successfully lobbied Apple to include a Cherokee font in all of their devices. And so it's there now. If you have an iPhone or an iPad or a Mac or something like that, you have a Cherokee font on it and a keyboard is available to you. This was a tremendous step towards their goal of preserving their language, which is in danger of eventually dying out. Having the syllabary on iPhones and iPads made the learning of it more appealing to Cherokee children, and younger generations learning the language is what they need to keep the language strong. Their problem was that there were only about 2 acceptable Cherokee fonts which they could actually use. And so they ended their presentation with a dramatic plea to all the type designers in the audience, and I was there. They asked us to design Cherokee typefaces because they had so few. They said, you have tens of thousands of fonts, and they are a significant part of your visual culture. This is a part of our visual culture, which we need to develop. Well, I was sitting there and I heard this, and I thought, I have to do this. I had reached a point in my career where I was asking myself, what's next? I was looking to take this thing that I'd mastered to another level, something with more meaning. And I was asking questions like, was it possible to design type that had a profound effect on people's lives? So I contacted Joseph Erb, who immediately sent me some scans of handwritten documents. And I also found a wonderful resource in the online manuscript archives of the Smithsonian Institution. My monoweight slab serif, which was in the drawer, seemed particularly suitable to accommodating a Cherokee character set, since most of the historical images of manuscripts and handwritten documents which I could find were monoweight as well, having been written with pencil or a stylus dipped in ink, or a crow quill without much variance in pressure. But confronted with the actual syllabary itself in type, I had a thought that I suspect most type designers would have when faced with the syllabary. How the hell am I going to space this? And by space, I mean assigning width values to the left and right side of each glyph to determine the amount of space between that glyph and the other glyphs to its immediate left and right. This is the kind of thing that would drive a Latin script type designer crazy. Because a designer of the Latin alphabet knows it's absolutely critical to readability to have spacing in a typeface that maintains an even rhythm of figure and ground. That this perfectly balanced yin and yang of black and white is essential to facilitating the reading process. So things like this were going to be hard to deal with. This was the first visual analysis that I did. And I also noticed something else about the syllabary, and that was that the range of form densities amongst the 86 glyphs was considerably greater than that of the Latin alphabet. Here you have the Latin alphabet, or the representatives of it that I could find that went from the simplest stroke density to the most dense. In the Cherokee, the glyphs are divided up and spaced in a greater range of densities with varying densities in between. This made for a much more disruptive text image than I was used to dealing with. It was also unsettling. But of course, at this point in the process, I was asking all the wrong questions. And I would learn what the right questions were as I went along. Another problem was the lack of models. It's absolutely true. They don't have much to work with. To me, Plantagenet, which is the one up at the top there, was the best current example of a Cherokee typeface design with respects to visual quality. And so I basically only had these three typefaces to look at for an idea of what was acceptable to the Cherokees. Plantagenet, which is on the Apple devices, and Digaweli, the official type of the Cherokee Nation, which they used for their official documents. And then down at the bottom, I had this one, which was created by Joseph Urban, which he called pretty crappy. But I thought, hey, it's a pretty sure thing he got the forms right, so I better keep an eye on that one too. Because I was tense. I was nervous about making mistakes and creating glyphs that were unacceptable. I wanted to be as respectful of this language community as possible. So I started out, creating the first drafts of glyphs based on the monoweight slab serif that I had, and doing the research along the way. I found the syllabary difficult to look at. It was so utterly different from what I was used to working with, or reading for that matter. And looking for inspiration in manuscripts was particularly challenging because I often didn't really know what I was looking at. There were these squiggles and shapes in the handwriting that I didn't recognize at all. I wondered what many of these glyphs were. Where did they come from? They weren't in the few typefaces that I'd found, not as far as I could tell. I thought maybe I was missing something, or maybe these were obsolete symbols that I would be finding later. I didn't know what was going on. Along the way, I found a number of helpful articles online, especially Ellen Cushman's essay, The Cherokee Syllabary from Script to Print. This was when I learned that the type is actually a representation of a form of shorthand, adapted from an original longhand script. I found a reference to her book, The Cherokee Syllabary, which you see here, in the bibliography. Bought it, and I was on my way. But this wasn't an instruction manual on how to design Cherokee type, but rather it contained explanations of the syllabary's history, its function, and its social and political implications. While I was still reading Cushman's book, and she's in the faculty at Michigan State University, by the way, and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. While I was still reading her book, the first draft of the 86 glyphs in the lightweight was done, and so I sent a specimen to Joseph for his first impressions. His response was this: "We went over the font. It looks really great. I know you are adjusting some of the spacing still, but as for the glyphs, they are easily read. You have done a really good job making a new Cherokee font." And my internal reaction to that was twofold. One, wow, that's great. All right, I didn't screw up. Pretty good. And two, but is it any good? I realized there what I should have realized right from the very beginning. The guys in the language technology office are not type designers, so they couldn't very well act as art directors. And to be honest, I didn't know yet how to ask questions to the members of a language community when working on a non-Latin script. This comes with experience. So this made it all the more important that I learn as much as possible about the function and historical context of the syllabary in order to have a mental framework for designing it. Fortunately, my continuing research and readings while developing my design were making the syllabary more familiar to me and began to open up the field of possibilities that was available to me in designing it. I was beginning to sense that I actually had more leeway in design than I had previously suspected. The fear of making mistakes was beginning to slip away. Slowly but surely, my question of how do I space these glyphs changed to how is Cherokee read? This is the more pertinent question because glyph forms are connected to their function and meanings, and the spacing is connected to the reading process, as it is with the Latin alphabet. An officially accepted history of the syllabary states that it was invented by Sequoyah, a Cherokee scholar. There are no photos of him, only idealized representations like what you see here in various forms. By the early 1800s, the power by which the white men could talk on paper, transporting their spoken words through time and space, had been noticed and wondered at by many Cherokees. At that time, they were struggling to maintain their identity and culture amongst the ever-increasing incursion of white settlers on their territories. And this was their, by the way, this was their original homelands, which is today basically the southeastern United States, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, a bit of Kentucky, and a piece of Alabama. Many Cherokees thought the written speech of the white man was one of the mysterious gifts of the Great Spirit and was not intended for them, and that kind of depressed them. But Sequoyah didn't think so. He insisted that it was just a clever invention. He was a metalsmith and a draftsman, and he also had a thorough knowledge of the Cherokee language. It is speculated that he knew some English but chose never to speak it. He felt that the Latin script was insufficient for accommodating the complexities of the Cherokee language. Cherokee is what linguists call a polysynthetic language, in which words can consist of a high number of morphemes. Morphemes are the smallest meaningful unit of a language. Therefore, one word in Cherokee can be an entire sentence in English, in which each syllable uttered can have meaning. It's said that Sequoyah spent 10 years developing his system, and he settled on a system of 86 glyphs that covered every syllable in the Cherokee language. It could be described as a longhand cursive, and it had absolutely no resemblance to the Latin alphabet. In 1820, he presented it to the tribal elders. Now, up until then, people were aware that he was sort of fiddling around with something, so when he made this presentation, they really didn't understand it, and he was accused of witchcraft and subjected to a trial. After this trial, in which he could prove the nature and benefits of his system, the warriors judging the trial asked Sequoyah to teach them this new skill, and within a week, all were able to read and write their own language, because part of Sequoyah's strategy was to create a system that had a design which facilitated the learning of it. Literacy spread quickly throughout the Cherokee Nation. Okay, what you're looking at here is a manuscript that is said to have been written by Sequoyah himself. And it shows, it's in the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it shows the longhand glyphs paired with their shorthand counterparts and then divided by little squiggly lines. It's interesting to look back on all this and realize that a unique writing system is not common amongst Native American nations. Sequoyah's efforts could be considered political acts in which he and the Cherokees created a clear demarcation between the Cherokee and Eurocentric cultures. The creation of the syllabary, viewed from an historical distance, seems to me to be part of a continuum of tactics, a consistent strategy of putting cultural stakes in the sand and saying, this is our culture, this is what belongs to us, this is what defines us. And of course, language is a huge component of culture. There's the longhand. The anthropologist Margaret Bender, I believe she taught at the University of Chicago and studied the eastern band of Cherokee quite a bit. In her book of Signs of Cherokee Culture, she says that this is the greater value of the syllabary. She emphasizes that its most important role is in being an icon of Cherokee cultural identity. And there's the shorthand. The shorthand came about when a missionary who worked with the Cherokees was made responsible for facilitating the casting of a lead font so that the Cherokee language could be printed and disseminated in larger circles. But the longhand didn't really lend itself to being cut and cast in type. One version of the story has the missionary Samuel Worcester and a Cherokee named Elias Boudinot adapting Sequoyah's forms for conversion into type. Another history states that Sequoyah himself developed a kind of shorthand to be used for printing, saying that the new glyphs would do for print and the old ones would do for writing. Well, it didn't really turn out that way. It's interesting to note that the shorthand, once it was developed, was used in handwriting as well, even before a lead font could be made. The syllabary provided by Chief Charles Hicks in 1825 to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which you see here, suggests this, as do manuscripts from that time. The longhand quickly fell out of use. Now, this part of the story happened in a relatively short period of time. The syllabary had been adopted by the Tribal Council in 1821, and issue number 1 of the first Cherokee language newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, was published in 1828. Coming to know all this information began to break down walls for me, and I began to realize that I had a lot more room to move in than I had previously suspected in designing the Cherokee glyphs. I had also spent enough time with them so that I was becoming more comfortable with them. Spending time with them is really important. So I began to develop the bold weight, and for those of you not familiar with digital type design, it's probably more common than not today for type designers to spend most of their time working on the polar extremes of a range, whether it's a width range or a weight range or something like that. They'll spend most of their time on the lightest weight and on the boldest weight. And they'll use font editing programs in the computer to generate the weights in between, which reduces the amount of time you spend on those considerably compared to the way they used to be done. So this is completely standard practice. But I wondered, why were there no Cherokee bold fonts? And why no multi-weight font type families in the first place? Further study of history revealed that the speaking of their language and the writing of it using the syllabary had been systematically and officially suppressed until as late as the 1960s. And there's a whole history behind that I encourage you to look up. During the forced infusion of English into the Cherokee culture, the syllabary may have lost some of its clout as a writing system, but it maintained its role as an icon of Cherokee culture, as Bender suggests. It's only recent that they've been able to build their resources again in this regard, and it occurred to me that the plea at the conference for new typefaces was not only a logical move to address a perceived deficiency, but also part of a strategy to reinstall it as a robust writing system in order to strengthen their language and their cultural identity. So why not a multi-weight family? And so I went ahead and began to make one. Also at about this time, I asked Joseph what he thought of my creating an italic. Not an oblique of the upright glyphs, but a real cursive italic, one that showed more of the influence of handwriting. Basically, there's never been a Cherokee italic type. There is no Cherokee italic. And his response was interesting. He thought I should give it a try and said that Cherokee speakers like the variations in handwriting, but that their fonts never showed that variety. And with his response, he sent me a PDF. And this is when something extraordinary happened. He sent me a scan of a letter written in Cherokee, and it included an English translation. But what was really important was that he also typed out the text of the letter in Plantagenet. I have no idea why he did this, but he did it. And finally, I was able to equate some of the squiggles and odd shapes I'd been seeing in Cherokee manuscripts and the glyphs of the syllabary. In a manner of speaking, this was my Rosetta Stone. Suddenly, I could identify the inexplicable forms I'd been seeing in the scans that Joseph had sent me previously, as well as the manuscripts from the Smithsonian Institution. Using the letter and the key, I could see how many of the shorthand glyphs changed when they were written by hand, and some of them changed significantly. It became clear to me that I wasn't going to be creating an italic that just had an angle and some handwriting nuances in the offstrokes. It was going to have some glyphs that were handwriting specific, just like an italic in the Latin script. Once I was able to decipher the glyphs in the manuscripts, I was able to accumulate a number of different variations for each glyph and decide which would be the most suitable basis for its counterpart in the new italic. It was encouraging to see, and a relief to me, to be honest, to see that when upright glyphs changed in handwriting, these transformations had become a kind of standard in and of themselves, so that I wouldn't be channeling an odd one-off quirk of some individual writer from, 1857 or something like that, but rather I'd be creating glyphs that would be recognizable to anyone who can read Cherokee handwriting. Still, each glyph that changed could have a considerable number of variations to choose from. It was also interesting to note that some glyphs didn't change at all when written by hand, and I have no idea why. A few months later, I had a first draft of a Cherokee cursive italic, which I sent in a proof to Joseph. And I wrote, "This took a lot of work." And I looked at a lot of documents to familiarize myself with various handwritten styles in Cherokee. Although this first draft is inspired by forms which were found in Cherokee manuscripts, I may be overstepping the boundaries of what is acceptable to Cherokee readers. I need you to have a look at it and tell me what works and what doesn't work, or even if it makes sense to continue in this direction. And then I sent it off, and then I didn't hear anything. I was used to getting an answer back from him in a couple of days, and a week went by, and I just thought, oh Christ, now I've done it. I pissed him off. Now he's really angry. And, but what was actually happening was that he was showing it around. And he was having people there in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is the capital of the Cherokee Nation now. He was having them look at it. And after 3 weeks, I received this response. "The font looks great, and a true start-from-scratch italic font. Several people really like it, and some think some of the glyphs look kind of strange. But overall, I think it is really great." He thought the acceptance of the italic would come with use, and he said, "It is hard to get 100% approval on anything. Cherokee people have independent minds. We are getting used to different fonts and seeing Cherokee in different ways. Imagine you see one main font for generation after generation. After that long, new fonts are a shock to the system, and in this case, I think it is a good shock. This is something completely new." Well, needless to say, I was pretty excited by this response, realizing that I was doing something quite exceptional. In fact, I sort of punched the air for about 15 minutes. I mean, it was so incredible. And so I set about to developing the italic and the bold italic further. I continued to make changes to the proportions of all the glyphs as I became more comfortable with them. Here you see 3 generations of a single glyph through the course of that year. In the first, you can see that I'm anxious about spacing it, and then I'm keeping the element on the right as small as possible so that it will be as little of a spacing problem as possible. But as time went on and the question turned from an issue of spacing to an understanding of the glyph, The right element grew in size until I understood that it is not an appendage stuck onto a Roman letter, but rather an important element that has to have a real presence in the whole thing. And then, of course, there is the issue of overall spacing. Since I can't read the syllabary, I wasn't sure what the best basic spacing should be. The lead typing historical examples, like the Cherokee Phoenix, is spaced out really wide, while digital fonts like Plantagenet and Digo Whaley are spaced close together, like the Latin alphabet. My research brought me to the conclusion that Cherokee glyphs should be spaced wider than alphabetic letters, like the optimal spacing for Latin caps, maybe even wider. And the word space, and there's a word space in every font designed to that font, is also not unimportant. I had to consider my strategy for the design's priorities, and that was that it should be a Cherokee typeface with an accompanying Latin complement and not the other way around. So the default word space is set for the Cherokee glyphs, and for the first version of Forius Cherokee, kerning values are used to adjust the Latin glyphs into it. And that was the conclusion of Forius Cherokee version 1.0. It was brought out onto the market in 2014 through my own foundry, TypeCulture, and plug, and also through Adobe systems. And then came Forius Cherokee 2.0. During this process, and in the following year, the Cherokees had been working on developing a lower case for their syllabary. Now, this is nothing short of historic, making additions to a writing system for the first time almost 200 years after its invention. And the inspiration for these has come from how Cherokee was often said in the past. Here you see a historic document. The lower case essentially consists of smaller versions of the uppercase. It's kind of like small caps, if you will. And so once these had received Unicode code points, which makes it possible for digital type to be transferred around the world and come out the same in the receiving end, I get a message from Adobe saying, ready to begin work on these? It'd be nice if we could have these. And I said, okay, let's do it. So I created the lowercase and added some numbers and symbols that would work with it, and Forius Cherokee went online in 2015. It seems to me that the iconic status of the syllabary, that with the iconic status of the syllabary, the visual voice of the glyphs may have taken a lower priority in the Cherokees' relationship to their writing system. But people like Joseph and Roy have recognized that the syllabary needs to make up ground in this area of voice and style and personality. As they said in their TypeCon presentation, variety in typefaces is an important part of visual culture, and more Cherokee typeface designs will be essential to their efforts in building the strength of their written language. Since the year 2011, they've not only developed the lowercase for their writing system, they've worked with Microsoft to develop a Windows interface in Cherokee, and with Google to develop Google Search and Gmail interfaces, and to have it installed on Android phones, inventing hundreds of Cherokee terms for computer technology in the process. Sequoia created something that has had a profound effect on the Cherokee people to this day. And as we'll see in the next part, the cultural identity in an indigenous writing system is a considerable tool in the preservation and proliferation of a specific language and culture. So this project developed into something quite extraordinary. And believe me, at the beginning of it, I did not see it coming. I did not see that coming at all. I might say something to the name Forius. Forius, that's not a Cherokee word. It's ancient Greek, and actually modern Greek. It means bearer or carrier. And when I checked for that name online to see if it was taken by someone else, I couldn't believe it wasn't. I just said, is this a brilliant name for a typeface or what? So it doesn't bother me too much that it's Greek, and it doesn't bother them too much either, but I just thought it was a great name for a typeface. So round about the end of the production on Forius 2.0, by that time I had run into a guy in Portland. I'd heard he was out there. I was surprised to find that there was another type designer in Maine. It's unbelievable. And who is this guy? He was a guy named Neil Patel. As it turns out, he was a grad of RIT. And he got his degree here in microelectronic engineering. And now he's a type designer. Well, he actually did work in with semiconductors and processors and things like that, and then had a change of mind about his career, and he took up type design. And you can invite him, and I'll let him tell you that story, the details of that story. But he was out there, and he had been doing it for about 5 years, and but he had the whole experience behind him. The college calculus, which I admire anyone who can pass that without cheating, and all that stuff. So he had like he's the brainiac. He had the tech brain, and at the end of Forius 2.0, there was some pretty technical stuff that had to be done in the production to prepare it for Adobe Typekit. And so by then we had come to know each other, and I said, "You want to help me out on this?" And he said, "Sure." And so he helped me out. We found out we could work together pretty well. So we started up a studio after Forius was done. That's Jamra Patel. And we specialize in the design of non-Latin typefaces. And our first big, enormous project was I certainly wanted more of this. I had learned so much. I mean, that was one of the great things, is not only the feeling that you're doing something that helps further another culture or revive a culture or helps another people, but the fact that I learned so much. I mean, before I started that project, I didn't know anything about Native Americans. Well, not enough anyway. And I'm certainly not an expert now, but I certainly know a lot more than I did. And it's just what you learn. And I just thought, oh, this is it. I've got to keep doing this. This is, it's so meaningful too. It's so meaningful. So we looked around at what's going on in non-Latin type design. And it's a growing market in my industry. It's a growing, there are more and more type designers doing it. And we said, where's all the activity? Well, all the activity right now, it's concentrated in Southeast Asia and in Indic scripts, the Indian subcontinent, largely because those are stable economies and there's some kind of commercial compensation for it. So where are people not doing anything? Africa. So we thought, okay, we'll develop this, let's put together a really massive system. There are some African typefaces out there, some typefaces with African scripts out there. But again, single weight families, one font families, no type families, multi-weight type families or anything like that. Nothing of any really perceivable quality, with the exception of one Ethiopic font. And so we decided, let's put together this massive system where all these things are coordinated, and it's absolutely undeniable. And the plan is not to sell it retail to the people on the ground, because there is no retail market for fonts basically maybe in South Africa, but in the rest of the continent, there's really no retail market for fonts there. And they need these. So let's license it. Let's make this thing undeniable and license it to the people with the deep pockets, the OEMs, the computer manufacturers and stuff like that. Make them pay for it, and then through them, it gets to the people on the ground who really need it. That was the plan, okay? So, to state the obvious, there are a lot of languages in Africa, around 2,000. Approximately 1/3 of the world's languages are on the African continent, which is the second largest continent on Earth. The color bands you see here show the geography of linguistic families, which have individual languages as their subsets. And then dialects and accents are subsets into that. So this is what Neil and I are doing. We're designing this very large type system of coordinated scripts that covers the most prominent writing systems in use on the African continent in different weights and, where appropriate, in italics. And you see some of them here. This is just some of them. We're totaling 9 nowadays, and it's not quite finished yet. This is a type system, obviously, that can handle multilingual tasks and keep the same color throughout a document. But it's also designed with mobile devices in mind, because these are the motors of communications and commerce in Africa. And anyone who's been to a developing country or third world country, or whatever they call it nowadays, knows this. I mean, they may have no infrastructure at all, but everyone has a cell phone. And many of these places totally leapt over our period of landlines and stuff like that, and they went from no telephones to everyone having a cell phone. So it's interesting. We're learning a lot about what happens when that happens to a people or a country, and how they deal with this technology in a completely different way sometimes completely different way than we do. So it's pretty interesting. So even in areas lacking a reliable power grid, and in Africa there are many, cell phones are everywhere. So that's why we're going from a mono-weight light, as you see here, to a high contrast bulb. And by contrast, I mean there's a large difference between the thick and the thin strokes. In the light, there's no difference there. The advantage of this with respect to screen displays is that the stroke contrast in the bolder weights keeps the glyph counters open. And the fact that this technical strategy also conforms to many of the historical models that we found made it seem like the best way to go. These are the primary areas of influence that the scripts have. And to give you a sense of scale, that green band there signifying the geographical area affected by the Adlan script is about as wide as the continental United States, coast to coast. This is a look at the Glyphs that we're developing. This is called, in the tech world, this is called Ethiopic, but its actual name is Glyphs, which is one of the oldest writing systems we're working on. It's either 2,000 or 4,000 years old, depending on which history book you read. But it's been around for a long time. Here are a few glyphs from the Vi Syllabary, the writing system of the Vi people in Liberia. The Vi Syllabary was invented not long after the Cherokee Syllabary, in fact, in 1830. These are just a few. There are, instead of 86, there are 300 glyphs in this system. The Ethiopic I just showed you, the complement comes in at a robust 528 glyphs. I lost a couple of years of my life making the first draft of that. We're taking our cues for the Vi and actually all the other scripts from manuscripts dating back to its invention, and through that we're managing to avoid the excessive use of geometric simplifications, which is what tends to sterilize most digital renderings of Vi or any of the other scripts that we're working on. Here's another manuscript we found. The Houghton Library at Harvard has been very helpful in this respect, and the Widener. They have some great material there. This is a first draft of our Tifinagh complement, the writing system of the Berber peoples and nomadic Tuaregs of northern Africa and the Sahara region. This is also a very old, this is also thousands of years old. And I'm just showing you the lights here, or sometimes the bold, but we have all weights from all these things. This is our Nko. And I'm going to give you a closer look at our Nko to show you how these projects have generally developed. Nko is a connected script, reads from right to left, and is an alphabet used for the Manding language in the dialects Bambara, Maninka, Mandinka, and Jula. Nko is one of the first scripts, African scripts, we tackled. Manding is spoken mostly in West Africa. One of the things we're putting a lot of care into is the extensive amount of research that we do into the different writing systems we're designing, and we're finding out that this is not absolutely extraordinary in the part of the industry that designs non-Latin scripts, but it's still pretty unusual. Not too many people. It seems like the bigger the company, the less research they do. We also seek out dialogues and critiques from authoritative experts, both within and around the language communities that we're designing for. We do what's necessary to create designs that are respectful of the needs and culture of each specific language community. And of course, we love how much we're learning from all of this. Again, when I started this, I didn't know anything about Africa, but that has changed a bit. The Nko script was also invented by a single individual, Suleiman Akante, who was a merchant and autodidact born in Guinea in 1922. And he did it in order to provide a written form for Manding, which until that time was primarily oral. Kante's motivation was the inability of the Latin and Arabic scripts to transcribe the complexity of Manding, which is understandable since Manding is a tonal language. For example, each Manding vowel can take on one of 16 variations in length and tone. You only see 5 of them here, but you can see kind of the problem. On the right, you've got Nko, and over the vowel you have the tonal marker, In the middle, you see what that tonal marker is indicating is happening to that vowel. And on the left, you see the Latin script transcription, and you begin to see the problem here. They're all the same. It's just ba. You have no idea what's going on in the vowel. So Conte finished his development of N'Ko in February in 1949, so it's one of the younger scripts that we're working on right now. When we first looked at it, we really didn't have a feeling for why it had the overall form character that it has. But looking at regional cultural forms and patterns in everyday West Africa, we could at least speculate that this environment had some influence, at least, on Conte's decision-making when he was inventing the alphabet. So we went towards art artifacts and art history and sort of cultural artifacts for clues. And it would seem to make sense that the shapes of glyphs could have had their forbearance in something like what we see from this cloth, from Senegal, or in this village in Burkina Faso. Now, of the few N'Ko fonts out there, they all pretty much look like this, which is a kind of graphical simplification of the script, or as I like to say, the Futuraization of the script. We found that this happens a lot when scripts are first digitized and released as a font. It's always done kind of carelessly, and they're thrown out there, and let's make it out of sticks and circles as much as we can and sort of fudge the rest. And again, there are no multi-weight families. But in handwriting, N'Ko looks like this, which we found much warmer and more personable. In fact, this is Suleiman Akante's handwriting. So in designing our N'Ko, we wanted to bring some of that humanity and warmth into it. We also wanted to get closer to the traditionally handwritten bold variant, which had a distinct contrast in stroke weight, the logic of which we could not figure out for the life of us. And it wasn't until Neil did pen exercises in order to discover the construction, or the ductus, of the N'Ko forms that we could begin to speculate on why the thin and thick strokes were distributed in the way they are. So once we had a first draft finished, we went on a kind of internet journey to establish a connection to someone we can talk to in the language community and show proofs to and get feedback from. But because as you can imagine, it's critically important to have experts and critics within the language community in order to design type that's useful to them and respectful of their culture. But we really didn't know where to begin. I mean, we didn't know anyone over there, and they were an ocean away. But then I had this thought, I have a friend of mine who travels to Senegal every year. And one time I stuffed a bunch of N'Ko proofs of our design into his hand. I said, when you go over there, if you see this, take a picture of it, and if you can find anyone who can speak authoritatively to it, then have him get in touch with us, or at least have him point us to someone who can speak authoritatively to it, which he did. And we got an email from this guy in Senegal, and he pointed us to a guy at Boston University who has just recently become the director of the program of African Studies at BU. He is Senegalese. He doesn't speak Manding, but he knew where I should go. He pointed me to a guy at Harvard University who's the preceptor of the African Studies program there. Is a gentleman named Boubacar Diakité, who's originally from Mali. He was our first critic. He put me in connection with a guy in Cairo, a man named Baba Mamadi Diané, who was a student of Suleiman Akante. And we were really happy about that. It was like, yes, end station. You know, this is the guy who has the definitive answer, definitely. He put us in touch with a guy in Conakry, who put us in touch with a guy in New York City who teaches history, West African history in NYU, who put us in contact with another guy in Guinea. And so it was all this, it seemed so haphazard, but in the end, so this was our team. And in the course of the project, we came to slowly realize that these people are actually at the core of the N'Ko literacy movement in West Africa. These were the guys who were pushing the whole thing. Their feedback was enthusiastic, definitive, thorough, and we were able to make our design correct and readable. And when we submitted it in italic to them, which had never existed as type, they welcomed it. You're starting to recognize a trend here? Italics. So this is the first N'Ko italic type. And in the end, what we have is the first multi-weight, multi-style Encode typeface family. Now, this is a blog that you can see. This is a Manding blog that you can see online. And this is rendered in a system font, one of those simplified system fonts right now. And you can see the problem with system fonts also is that they can get obsolete pretty quickly as OSs are update, and so the shaping engine doesn't work anymore. And you see the title up here, it's broken. It's not even connecting anymore. The tonal markers are over spaces instead of over vowels and things like that. But if our type system was actually in play here and rendered that page, it would look like that. And which we think is much more, I think, inviting and a lot more readable. This whole project, working on all these scripts, has finally confirmed something that we've suspected since I designed 4E's Cherokee, and that is that writing systems are more than just writing systems. The indigenous scripts of Africa are important symbols of ethnic and social identity, every bit as much as they are vehicles of written communication. And the significance of this fact, both in society and the design of typefaces, should not be underestimated. And we can look again at Encode as a good example of this. Okay, here we go. I need you to concentrate on this highly technical infographic here. This is really, we're mining the big data here. Edward Tufte, eat your heart out. This is really, okay. So but this actually illustrates something we learned from an educational linguist we've gotten to know who does his field research in West Africa and specializes in Manding. Manding is often written using the Latin script as well, but he told us that interest in literacy within the Manding community throughout West Africa increased dramatically with the introduction of the Encode script. And it's because they understand that Encode is theirs. They own it. It's a symbol of who they are. It's a kind of icon. And we've seen evidence of this in our development of other scripts as well. This is Adlon. This is the youngest script we're working on. It was invented in the 1980s by two brothers, Ibrahima and Abdoulaye Barry, who belonged to the Fulani people of West Africa. And this is the writing system that serves Pular, which is a language spoken by millions of people. There are the brothers, and we're working with them. Can you imagine you're working with the inventors of a writing system? We're working with the brothers on our interpretation of the script, as well as some other projects. But here, too, the desire for literacy within the Fulani community is being fueled by ethnic pride with the introduction of a script. And then, of course, there's the Latin script. With its combined complements of the International Phonetic Alphabet and the African Reference Alphabet, it's the most prevalent writing system in Africa. It's used for hundreds of languages. So we're doing a full complement of that as well. And as we're developing this system, the problem is that while Africa is considered an emerging market, large corporations are only tentatively inching their way in, some at a glacially slow rate, others cautiously making seed investments. And so with this fact in view, this is where we made the decision to develop some apps and try a little market building on our own, which I know sounds kind of ridiculous because, and like a considerable amount of bravado, because considering that Africa is gigantic and we're just two guys in Portland, Maine. But what were we supposed to do, at least until we could sell a license? So we thought we'd sort of build the market a little bit too. This is the false ending, but it's not the real ending. This is to give if some people have to go to class or something like that, this is where you go. I have about 10 to 15 minutes more, and I'll show you some things that we have done that uses the typefaces and also feeds back into the typefaces as we get responses from the market, which is quite different from our own. So if you get up and leave, I won't be hurt. Okay. So this is, again, it's a great project where we're just learning so much. So first, a little bit of a setup, looking at the African markets. So success depends on so many components being in place that in many places aren't really there yet. And the strength of many of those components depend on the strength of other components. sometimes setting up vicious circles that are only incrementally broken. It is kind of like a house of cards, if you really think about it. So you've got all these things that have to be in place for things like this to work. And they are in place in the United States and in Europe and all the other countries where they don't have these problems. But they're not in place sometimes in Africa. Things like a reliable power grid. The first question I had for somebody who was there when they were telling us about, oh, in Guinea, yeah, let's see, 5 years ago we had power for 2 hours every 3 weeks or something like that. And so my first question was, how do they charge their phones? And the answer is solar cells. They're quite common. People get a solar cell and set it up in their garden or something like that. And if you're walking down the road and your phone needs charging, you just go up to them and say, "Can I charge my phone on your solar cell?" And of course, they're a very welcoming people, and they say, "Sure, of course." They'll probably invite you in for tea or something like that. But that was the first question there. Another one was payment methods. Okay, credit cards aren't exactly a thing. Phone plans, no Verizon, no AT&T, that kind of thing. So how is that done? Well, SIM cards, basically. You can buy your time and your data at any market, at any vendor on the street, in any drugstore or something like that. You go in there and you pay for the amount of time. You can also pay your phone bill or something like that with that as well. So, what you're seeing here is an email we got from somebody who was saying a friend of mine in Saudi Arabia would like to download this app that we developed, but he can't, and because he doesn't have a credit card. And so we sent him a promo card so he could download it for free. Ad networks. Okay, so what's the incentive to develop apps in Africa, which almost invariably have to be for free, because otherwise they're just not going to go anywhere. So how can you monetize those? Get some kind of compensation at all for your labor? Well, ad banners. Of course, if you have an ad network that's tremendously weak, that's going to get you pennies a day, literally. And so the incentive is not really, you need a greater sense of charity and altruism to develop apps for many of the countries there. And so the weak ad networks makes the monetization of app development extremely problematic. Internet infrastructure is also a problem, but the really big thing is this. That is meaningful and indigenous content, and this is where we hope to come in and make a difference. Africa has the lowest internet adoption rate of any other region in the world. It's like 28%. And the reason why is because people don't really see the use. They don't see any use in it. They can't see it doing anything for them. And they've taken polls of people, done huge surveys, and a lot of it's because they just don't see any practicality in it for them. And a lot of the reason for that is because they don't understand the languages that's in it. They see a lot of English, they see a lot of French, which is of course a lot of the governmental languages there left over from the colonial powers. But they may not speak those languages very well, not enough to derive any use out of content on the internet. What they need is indigenous content in indigenous writing systems. And so that's just not there. So we go back to our highly intellectual graphic here, and it's basically the same thing for indigenous content. If that were to, as that appears online, more and more people are interested, get online and use the internet, which has been proven to raise the prosperity or the living conditions of people. If people can get on the internet, then they have all kinds of opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't normally have. What you can get there now, and here's some mock-ups of phone faces. What you can get there now is on the left, the system fonts that are out there are kind of junky, and ours on the right, we're hoping to change that to something like this, to something that we would contribute to a better experience. On the left, I think that's Noto, Google's Noto font. But we looked around and we asked ourselves, what was missing in the chain of technology that leads to content generation? And we came upon input methods. For example, we saw that this was the weakest link in the whole thing. Google's Noto font is out there, and it's in a lot of phones, but there was a lack of decently functioning keyboards for creating content in indigenous languages. So we began with Unco and the iOS platform, where we saw a lack of reasonably functioning keyboards for Manding. So our brief was basically make it look like an Apple keyboard, which just didn't exist yet, and make it look like it belongs to the iPhone, and a UX that prioritizes efficiency and is reliable and predictable. And oh, by the way, this is Neil doing all this stuff. When we started this project, he was not an app developer. Now he's an app developer. He's one of these guys that's just dogged. I mean, when things get too dense technically, and we're saying, oh, let's do this, this, and this, this, and this, and this, and I see what's involved technically, I'm inclined to say, let's just do this over here, you know. And he'll say, no, I can figure this out. I can figure this out. So he'll just be on it until he's got the whole thing. He's got the nut cracked. So a lot of details have to be attended to, like the key size. It's kind of interesting, you know, if you don't just have the Latin alphabet, you've got an alphabet that has a lot more glyphs, then that has an effect on the size of the keys. And the shadows and the pop-up positioning and actually having test devices where we're testing the performance. So the final layout has it's language community approved key layout. So we sent them layouts and had them got their feedback on it. The figures and lesser used characters are in the shift screen. New currency symbols are there. And math and other symbols are on the third screen with the figures to minimize screen changes. And then there's also long press functionality. So for diacritics, like the tonal markers and lesser used but similar characters are bundled. And then you'll see this in action here. We got a little movie going. And there's a long press, sets a tone marker, and now we're going to go for a currency symbol. Okay, so there you go. And so we're like, right, got it. We're going to go to market now. Here we go. Put it out there, beta test. And they come back and say, no, it must have a predictive dictionary. And we're like, what? You know, what are you? And they actually gave us a database of 60,000 words in code. Which Neil had to work into the whole thing. And it makes sense because a lot of the Manding words are long. And so in order to create content quickly, it would be great to have, you know, predictive suggestions pop up that you can just tap and then have that go up into what you're setting. So he had to optimize, he optimized to minimize load times and memory use. Yeah, that was great because I remember when he started off, the thing kept crashing because it was loading the entire dictionary every single time. So he had to work out how to, you know, load bits and pieces of it on demand. And so it really but this is the kind of thing that speeds up. I got a little movie here again. So here it is in action, and so you get suggestions provided. There you go, and. So we also have some other features there, a character counter in code. Those are in code numbers. Of course, reading again from right to left. I actually think he has 140 there for Twitter. And then a sharing option, and we'll just go do that because there's another important feature here, which is important for the market. So we're going to share something here. Well, let's share it to Facebook. And we'll hit Facebook, and then here's our text. And you see it's rendering in Noto. Our typefaces on the keyboard because we can't force the font into the iPhone. But we did find out that we can use the app as kind of like a Trojan horse to get the keyboard into the iPhone, and so that it can be installed like any other Apple keyboard. It's not some separate app thing. You can have it pop up like any other keyboard in an iPhone, and so. But we did sort of cloak it in this app where you can do other things like what's going on here. And so we're going to publish that thing, and you notice it's all in French because it's Francophone Africa. And then this is what you would get on your phone. And this is important because up at the top, you see the message comes in Noto. And then in the bottom is a JPEG with our font showing the original message. And this is great for backwards compatibility for people who have, the majority of people don't have smartphones. They have feature phones. So they don't have Note on them. And what they'll get is just a bunch of tofu, you know, those little rectangles and stuff like that. So for people who don't have the version of Android or the version of iOS or whatever that has that font on it, they at least get a JPEG with a picture of the message. So that's good. They can't respond because they don't have the keyboard, but it would be great for people sending messages out to communities saying, you know, there's an Ebola breakout or there's drought over here or something like that. You know, it would be great for health emergencies or environmental disasters, just letting people know. But what we found out from linguists who do their field research in West Africa is that there are chat rooms there, mostly on WhatsApp, with hundreds of people in them, typing in messages that are a mixture of 2 or 3 languages and maybe 2 or 3 different scripts. And some people just post audio files. And this fact and other bits of information that we came across in our research led us slowly to the realization that, on average, Africans are wildly multilingual. In fact, we read that when Africans speak of someone being bilingual, they're usually referring only to colonial languages, like English or French or Portuguese. Meanwhile, in the background, they're communicating with each other in 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 different African languages. So this influenced the design of our next keyboard, which was the Android keyboard. And Android is far more prevalent there because Apple devices are just too expensive, and as we all know. And so there's a lot more Android phones there. Some of them are really quite cheap. And so this led us to that realization. If they want to be able to communicate with each other in different languages using different writing systems, what we came up with was, this is not the movie, what we figured had to be in it was the ability to swap back and forth between one system and the next. So here's our little movie that shows that. And let me see, and swipe, and also long press capability for some of the IPA characters as well. So that's sort of the whole sort of market influenced what we were finding out in our research, influenced the design of these apps. We also created a calculator app in code with all this, with also the same kind of idea, which is where you can swap back and forth between the Latin character numbers and the encode numbers. And the Latin, of course, reads left to right, and encode is set up right to left, so it flips back and forth. This was an idea that came to me when I was traveling in China, and it was interesting because I can't speak any Mandarin or any other form of language there, and a lot of the merchants I was dealing with couldn't speak any English, and so the way we would communicate and actually bargain was, I wondered at first why everyone had like a calculator on top of their counter there when they had a cash register as well. I was like, why is that? But that was the bargaining tool. They could type in their figure and turn it and push it towards you. And then you would type in your figure and you would turn it and push it towards them, and they would go, are you kidding? You know, and they make all these faces. And then they would type in their figure and push it back towards you, and that's how you would bargain. So it was a communication device. So that led to this idea. We also did one for Adlan. And then finally, and this is where we wrap, finally, our latest app is the granddaddy of them all, based on basically the same idea. And this is the biggest thing we've done so far. I keep saying we. Well, I've been involved in some of the design decisions, but it's basically Neil doing this. I wouldn't know where to begin. And so it's also aimed at facilitating intercultural commerce, and it's clearly the most ambitious thing we've done in app development. And that is, it has a single calculator and a unit converter. This is important. That has the Latin, we call them, I know they're called Arabic numerals, but we have to say something in order to differentiate them from the actual Arabic numerals. And so by swiping through these, you can get through the Latin numbers, the encode numbers, the Adlan numbers, and the Arabic numbers. So you can see, and then when the reading direction flips, so does the calculator itself, and up at the top you have a unit converter, including a currency converter, which is live. It updates every 3 hours as long as you have an internet connection, and it contains all of the currencies in Africa, as well as the US dollar, the euro, the Canadian dollar, and the yuan, because China is very much in Africa right now. And I think the Indian rupee, because the Indians also have a history there, quite extensive. So the number of keys are reversed for Nko and Adlam, and then also he had to figure out, he had to get this all to work and be mathematically sound, of course. And so in the Latin interface, it's all left to right, and in Nko and Adlam, it's all right to left. But in Arabic, oh no, it's not that simple. The numbers in Arabic mathematics run left to right, but the expression runs right to left. Imagine trying to figure, it's like, what the hell? These are the guys who gave us mathematics. And so it's just, you know, it's like, what? So, and he figured that one. He said, wait a minute, I can figure this out, you know. 2 weeks later, works. And so here is, it's called Cal conversion because it works both in English and French. And we have a little movie there. And so there you go, typing in a number, swipe, 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 and you see the numbers change as he does that, brings up the unit converter. We're converting currencies here, and then swipe, swipe. And then here's the memory, and he enters that into the memory, and the memory bar comes out, and you can enter there. Okay, there we go. So that's kind of where we are right now. The system is, fortunately, okay, the update is, we have managed to sell a license to a very large client who shall remain nameless for now. And so we're going full blast on this because now we have a couple of really scary deadlines. And we have to get this finished, but all will be revealed, I believe, next year when we can actually, NDAs have been signed, so, you know, I can't say anything. And but fortunately, actually, it was the strategy worked. We did get someone with large pockets to finance the project, and so this will get out to the people who have the small pockets involved in it. They'll get it through bundled in with an update, or you know, an OS update or something like that, or in devices and that kind of thing. So that strategy actually worked. And I can't wait for it. It's also, the client is also somebody who has a presence in Africa, so we'll get out to them. So we're really pretty psyched about that. And that's the real ending. There you go. Okay.